you may believe. Do you believe? That's what the whole book of John is, right? That we believe. Here we are, and I would ask you, as I did the last time that we met, 2.5 years, more than 2.5 years into the study, do you believe any more than when we began? Do you believe? Not do you have more information, not do you understand better. Do you believe? Has it brought you to a place where you can say unequivocally, man, this cements it for me. This just really solidifies my faith in who God is. And do you believe any more in chapter 21 that you did in chapter 1? That's the increase that we're looking for. That yes, I believe. You know, every year I start off, my first message every January is about the hope of the new year. But you know what? Let me tell you, we all need hope, because some of us are going to have trials that are devastating. We don't know what the year holds, right? We don't know what God has planned in our lives. So, but I always ask, have you grown from last year? What about the commitments you made in January in 2017 or 2018? Have you fulfilled them this year? Have you kept those promises? Have you said, you know what, this is my growth pattern. This is my schedule that I'm going to use so that at the end of it all, I'm at the finish line. Have you maintained that? Have you been faithful to that? You know, we all have different ideas. Gym memberships increase. People have this promise, I'm going to get into shape. You know, yeah, I remember my daughter told me, Dad, round is the shape. So we need to be honest with ourselves. Do you believe any more than you did before? Or do you just have more information? The question is, do you believe more after investing almost 3 years of your lives? Can you imagine that? This almost the same amount of time that the apostles gave to Jesus. Do you believe any more? Because that's basically what we've done, haven't we? We've just followed his footsteps. You know, there was a gentleman today there at work. It was a customer, and I walked out and I recognized him, and I went up to him and I asked him if I could get him a bottle of water. And he said yes. And so when I handed it to him, I said, brother, are you still fighting the fight? And he didn't recognize me, and he looked at me. He said, yes, I am. He says, let me tell you something. He says, the only thing is, I just wish I could live longer so I could fight more. I said, that's a great ambition, my brother. That's a great ambition. To live longer, to fight more. Not just simply to live longer, but to fight more, to do his work, right? And you see it all the time, these veterans that come back and they feel out of place. They want to be with their team. They want to be with their squad. They need to get back to the company, to the battery. They need to be out there. They need to be fighting. They need to connect. They need to be somewhere where they feel their worth. And I will tell you that when we're in the battlefield doing God's work, that's where you feel the best. I am the closest to you. You are my family. I am closer to you than any blood relative that I have. That's the truth. Of course, I'm closest to Rona, but she's not a blood relative. I'm sorry? No, you don't. We still can't get stuff out of that thing. It's possible to spend time with Jesus and not be changed, isn't it? Judas did. It's possible for us to spend a lot of time here. We could spend a lot of time in church all the time and never change. I asked you a couple weeks ago if the only thing you've learned from the study, did it come from me? Or did you invest any time and effort? Did you study what we shared? Did you look into it? Did you say, Lord, reveal that to me? I want you to settle that in my heart. Lord, I want to believe that with everything in me. I don't want there to be any question. If what Pastor said is correct, if what he said is true, if what that man told me, then I want you to confirm that, Lord, because you brand that in my heart. You etched that with your finger in the tablet of my heart, and Lord, I will live by that. I think it would be a good thing to kind of recap on this. You know, this whole book is that John identified himself as the one that Christ loved. But John never lose sight in the whole, every chapter, he never lose sight of the motivation of his writing. And that was to believe, to persuade you, to convince you. That's incredible to me. He didn't go off on a tangent. He didn't chase, I remember when I coached the little girls' soccer team. And one time there was a butterfly, and they all started chasing it in the middle of a game. Or one of them lost something for their hair, and they all stopped, even the other team, to look for it. It was just amazing, We can't do that, okay? We can't do that. But the thing is that I don't read anywhere where Jesus ever gave a summation of his plan. He never does. And a lot of times what God does, the only thing he will do is tell you the promise. He'll never tell you his plan. And that's why we're always having to pray. That's why we get on our knees. Because, Lord, ultimately we want to be in line with your plan. So when that happens, we don't miss it. Right? So we need to ask ourselves, what is our true motivation? What is the motivation and the purpose of the message that you give, that you live in your life? Is it to believe? Are they convinced that you're a believer? Do they see you and say, wow, there's something different about that person? The Lord shares his purpose, and he shared the will of his Father, but he never told them specifically. He told them that they would suffer, but he never told them how. Here's the incredible thing, that you would think that they all died horrendous deaths, right? 11 of them. John, ultimately, this John here, he just died of old age. They tried to kill him. They tried to cook him. They couldn't light the fire. Can you imagine that? Nobody had a match. It's like, are you kidding me? In the kingdom, they just couldn't strike anywhere. It didn't work. Right? They light it and God blow it out. The Lord told them they'd suffer, but he didn't tell them to what degree. But I don't read anywhere that they were surprised that they would have to die. And how many times do we, when we have a little bit of trouble, it's like, whoa, wait a minute, really? I didn't know I was going to have to suffer. I didn't know I was going to have issues in my life. Can I tell you that everybody has issues? Everybody suffers. The rain falls on the just and the unjust, on the believer and the unbeliever. And Jesus was just this walking billboard promoting his Father. He shared everything about his daddy, everything. And even allowed the apostles to hear his conversation as he prayed all the time to his daddy. And then he said that his Father and he are one. Can I tell you, accepting something is not the same as believing something. That accepting something is not the same as believing something. So, I'll give you an example. We can accept what's going on in the world today because it's happening. But I don't believe that God's losing the fight. I don't believe that it's going to deter God. I still believe that he's coming. It doesn't taint my faith. It doesn't stop me from preaching. It doesn't keep me from getting on my knees. It doesn't. I can accept what's happening in the world today, but I believe that God is greater than what's happening in the world today. So just because we can accept something, it's not the same as believing something. Right? Just merely accepting this is what my life is. It's not the same as saying, but I know greater is he that is in me than he that is in this world. People everywhere are talking politics. They have an opinion of what's going on in America. People have aligned themselves. We have become so divided. And it's wrong. Can I share with you what I think? Slide 13. I think here's the problem. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Here's the problem. Do you see it? Let's go to the next slide. We're no longer one nation under God, therefore we are divisible. That's the problem as I see it. We have separated. We're no longer under God. This is why we're suffering. This is really, I believe this with all my heart. And I don't know where I was when I was reciting this. And I thought, wait a minute. That's the problem. We're no longer a nation that is one under God, and therefore we are divided. So do you see what happens? It brings division. I've shared with you that the same gospel, do you remember the gospel that I shared with you about Mary when she broke the alabaster jar? Do you remember that? That the same gospel can produce a Mary and produce a Judas. It's amazing how that can happen. So we have division because we're no longer a nation under God. In John 1:7 it says, He came as a witness to testify about the light, so that all might believe through Him. And then he goes on to say, but these things have been written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may what? Have life in His name. So chapters 1 and 21, I just read you the two scriptures. They are bookends for the rest of the chapter. That you believe. That's the premise. In the beginning, right, was God, His Word. And so we see at the end is the Word of God. In fact, it even talks about that in the last verse, that of all the miracles of God, of Jesus, have been documented, that all the books in the world couldn't contain it. So chapter 1 and 21 really are bookends. And with these two chapters is a revelation of the person who God is. Can I tell you that there's two books in the Bible that the devil hates and he's afraid of? I mean, ultimately he's afraid of God, but he's not to the point that he would ever change. But there are two specific books in the Bible that the devil just doesn't want you to believe in. He's fearful in those two books. Do you know what they might be? I'm sorry? Okay. Yes? And the other one? Genesis. Because if you believe that He did all this, He created all this, and then you believe that He's coming back, the devil hates the idea that you would believe that. Everything in between, to him, it doesn't matter. But if you believe Genesis and you believe Revelations, those are the two books that I'll tell you what, that he is most fearful of. Because there's power. It's the beginning of God. It's the introduction of God. And look at it this way, okay? Of all the books in the Bible, I don't mean to go off on a tangent here, but this is the Lord. Which of the ones did the world attack the most? Genesis? Evolution? Do you see it? The creation of man? Everything? All the nations? See, that's where his emphasis is. If he can distract, if he can destroy, if he in any way can give you ideas other than Genesis, that's what he wants to do. And you can tell where his emphasis are just based on what we see in the world today. And what's the second? Is the coming of Jesus. The return of Jesus, judgment on this world. Our country especially, we're a godly nation, and so we see these things happening. Right? We see other religions that are now becoming prominent in our country, where Christianity was the dominant, if not the prominent, religion. So you'll have these attributes in every situation of your life. So it's important for us to believe. It's important for you to get dug in. And if you're dull in the Word of God, let me tell you what. You need to get sharpened to a point. You really do. You need to allow the Lord to sharpen you, to bring everything you know to a point, because you're going to need that. God is surgical. Everything He does is precise, and He wants to use you. In John 21:15, it says, so when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of God, do you love me more than these? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to him, tend my sheep. And he said again a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to him, well, shepherd my sheep. Then in 17 he says, he said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know all these things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, tend my sheep. Tend my sheep. And Jesus has heart to heart with Peter, and I think that's important. And there's basically two ideas that I have about this conversation, okay? And so one of them that's kind of a side, it's not part of the two that I want to talk about, but Jesus addresses Peter 3 times. Some suppose it's because Peter denied Jesus 3 times. And so Jesus requalifies it 3 times. It's like God's undoing what Peter had done. That's a wonderful thought. Especially he's doing it with Peter. He's not saying that the act that you did, because it's forever written, it's documented. But he's saying as far as our relationship, it's not marred by it. And how many times should we forgive? 70 times 7. Jesus is just exercising that. So Jesus has his heart-to-heart with Peter, and all the others had already pulled ashore. We don't read of their interaction with Jesus. So they're there, but they're not part of this. And we are all probably familiar with this scene in the Bible. We read about it in chapter 18. Do you remember that? When Peter had denied, and I brought you through that whole scenario of the fire. Peter was standing at the fire when he denied Jesus the 3rd time, and then the rooster crowed. Do you remember that? And now we have the closure of it. They're at a fire, and it's a charcoal fire. Okay, and it's quite different, because you know what? Sometimes you have to get through the fire, don't you? You have to go through the fire. Sometimes, but you know what's wonderful? Is that Jesus is at both ends. Even when you sin, the word said that when the cock crowed, that Jesus looked at Peter. Now, do you remember he told Peter, Peter, I have prayed for you? He says, Satan has asked permission to sift you as wheat. Do you remember that? Because Peter said, Lord, when he told him he's going to deny him, there's no way. To the death I will fight with you. And Jesus said, look, Pete, I'm going to tell you right now, dude. Okay? You're going to deny me 3 times. It's going to happen, right? And he said, in fact, Satan has asked permission to sift you as wheat. But Peter, I have prayed for you. I have prayed for you when all this is said and done, that you would be strong. That you would be strong, Peter, and you would lead others. So we read about this in chapter 18. We study about the 3 denials of Peter, and though we touched on it, we didn't exhaust everything because I didn't want to show all my hand, right? I had to have something here. So there are many ideas and commentaries about this conversation, this encounter with Peter and Jesus, and there are a couple that I subscribe to, okay? And can I say this up front? It's not bulletproof, and it doesn't really matter. It really doesn't. But it's written. And so if it's written, I want to know why. And I have a couple, like I say, a couple of ideas, and I want to share them with you. I would also add that in the storyline like this, I think that God purposely leaves them open-ended for a reason, so that you can put your story in there, so that you could put your name in there, so you could put your face in there. Okay? Ultimately, I think that's why. But specifically, there are many possibilities. There are many scenarios in the lives of people that can fit the story. Okay? But the first possibility lies in the question that Jesus asked. Okay? Did anybody catch that? Do you love me more than these? More than these? What are these? The fish? What's he talking about? See, this is the way I study. I tell you, it helps me. And maybe you got a different way, but this is really kind of this. You should never go past these things without asking God. He will reveal them to you. When I was a Christian, just a sidebar. When I first became a believer, let me tell you, I didn't know the Word. I didn't know anything about the Bible. And just by wanting to learn, God has just blessed me. There's nothing, a secret to it. It's like playing guitar. People say, how do you learn how to play guitar? Practice. How do you learn the Word of God? Practice. You read it, and you study it, and you show yourself, right? So, approved. So the question here is, what are these? And Jesus only adds his comment to the first time that he inquires of Peter, do you love me more than these? Okay. Do you have any ideas what that might be? Do you love me more than these? Do you love me more than the other disciples love me? Okay. Anybody else? So let's go to this. Actually, you're right. That's one of them. Okay? That's the first thing. In fact, there are 7 apostles that are together with him. So he took 6 other guys with him. Okay? That's important. Peter was there. Thomas, Nathaniel, the sons of Zebedee were there. James and John, the author, along with 2 other disciples that aren't mentioned. But where were they supposed to be? Does anybody know? Does anybody have any idea where they're supposed to be at? Next slide, Matthew 28:16. Then the 11 disciples went away into Galilee to the mountain which Jesus had appointed for them. So this is at the end. This is after his resurrection. He appointed them to be at this mountain, and they left it. They left it. They weren't supposed to be at the lake. The lake's at the bottom of the mountain. They're supposed to be at the top of the mountain. They're supposed to be in the place of elevation where the Lord left them, right? So Peter was not in the place that Jesus had assigned or purposed for him, or that had designated for the disciples to be. Do you remember Jesus went every night and prayed in the Mount of Olives? And so we see that Peter went back. And maybe he said, I'm going fishing. Maybe he was just waiting and said, you know what, I'm fidgety. I'm one of these guys who just can't sit for very long. I'm going to go fishing. But I don't sense that it was a recreational decision to fish. I think Peter wanted to go back to his old way of life, what was comfortable. I was reading, on the way back from Mexico, I was reading an article, and it broke my heart, about a couple who were serving the Lord, and they were in this really big mega church. They were worship leaders, right? And they were playing all over the world, ministering. It was just incredible. And at some point in their lives, they said they just stopped and asked each other, what are we doing? And the husband just came out and said, you know what, I don't think I believe in God anymore. So the question I would ask is this, do they really believe? Because if you believe, it's not something you walk away from. It's like, there's no way. That doesn't change. The fact that I don't believe doesn't change the fact that he's still God. It's not that I don't believe, it's that I don't want to serve, I don't want to follow. And so it's quite different. So we see that Peter wanted to go back fishing. Can I tell you there's nothing wrong with fishing? But that's not what God told him to do. I believe that Peter was going back to what he was most comfortable doing. In fact, in John 16:32, it tells us, indeed the hour is coming, yes, has now come that you will be scattered each to his own and will leave me alone. Jesus predicted they were going to do this, and yet I am not alone because the Father is with me. He knew that they would abandon him, right? You will scatter each to his own. So now let me ask you another question, because this is important. What does it mean, each to his own? His own what? home, agenda, ambitions, purpose, business, way of life, property, ideas, all of that. That you will be scattered each to his own. Each person will leave. They will abandon God because of their own ideas, their own adventures, their own pursuits, ambitions. They will leave him. And so we go back to verse 15. So when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, Son of God, do you love me more than these? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I do. Now you got to understand that Peter is not in the place he's supposed to be. He's not doing the things God's called him to do. So I believe that in part, the possibility that Jesus was asking is, do you love me more than these things? Do you love me more than your life? Do you love me more than your ambitions? Do you love me more than these? Will you abandon the world and the pull that it has on you, and will you follow me? And so that's one of the ideas that I subscribe to. Why? Because that's scriptural. It's scriptural. Because that's the whole problem, is there's the allurement of the world, right? And so we have to make that decision to abandon ourselves and those worldly ambitions and follow God. I don't have a problem with that. So the second is, and my sister was right, there's 6 other guys with Peter. And I believe that Jesus may have even asked Peter in that it may have been part of it. Or maybe that in totality, maybe he looked at Peter and he said, do you love me more than these? And he looked back at the other 6. Is your love greater for me than their love for me? Peter didn't like to be outdone, did he? Do you remember in Luke chapter 9? It tells us, then a dispute arose among them as to which would be the greatest. So they were challenging one another as to who would be the greatest among them. No doubt Peter was in that conversation. Yo, wait a minute. The Rock. Yo, Peter. So my second possibility in this is Jesus has asked Peter this question, do you love me more than these guys love me? In other words, Peter, do you love me more than the other disciples love me? I don't know which one it was. I don't even know if it was either one of those. But Peter understood. And he said, yes. And what did Jesus tell him? Tend my sheep. He didn't say, prove it. I don't believe you. Really? Then why are you here? Help me understand why you're not doing the things I told you to do. I don't read that. And that's why I think that some of the things that we read about in the Bible are left open-ended, because you can apply what fits for you. The feeding of sheep is a lifelong commitment. What do you call one who feeds sheep? A shepherd. He's not a stable boy. He's a shepherd. So it would require a lifelong commitment. The idea behind feeding is a shepherd. And this is the measure of how much we love God and how much we serve others. Right? The greatest among you is what? A servant to all. And so there could be other possibilities, but these are the 2 that I hold on to, because both have significant meaning to me. They both make me mindful of where I need to be. And again, I'm not saying that this is exhaustive or conclusive, but this is what this holds for me. Praise God. We'll end it there. Thank you.